All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the session on designing playful African cities. Something that I think we should all be thinking about, not just as parents, but as folks coming from the youngest region in the world, very young demographic, where we're not often factoring the concerns, the potential, the interests of our very youngest citizens as we think about the future that we want in Africa. I'm very excited to be moderating this session. It's an all-star panel of women that are spending a lot of time working and thinking and dreaming about what a playful African city could look like. My name is Orio Kolo. Until most recently, I was the MD of a media network and Luminate Group in Africa. Also serve on a number of boards, including Stanbic Kenya. I chair the Stanbic Foundation. Recently joined the Van Leer Group Board of Trustees as well. Uh, I will let all the panelists introduce themselves because they'll probably do a much better job than I will, and share very briefly a bit more about who they are and the work that they do, and then we'll dive right into what I hope will be an interactive, provoking, and educative session. I will start off with Amoe Phillips. If you could share a bit more about who you are, how you got me to be a moderator, actually, and and the work that you do with the Mofora Foundation.
Thank you so much, Ori. Yes, we made this connection on Twitter when you talked about Africa's demographics and the designing of cities, and this is why we have you here. And I'm so glad that you've been able to join us. Hello, my name is Amoe Phillips, and I am the international representative as well as the project lead for many of the initiatives of Mofra Foundation, which is a civil society organization based in Accra, Ghana. Mofra means children in Ghana's most commonly spoken language, which is Akan. And our mission is to provide enrichment opportunities and spaces outside of the formal classroom, in which children in Ghana who are aged 0 to 15 can thrive in many ways, culturally, cognitively, and so on. So our tagline is that we are the space where children play, culture, and nature connect. Um, since this is an Africa Forum, I would like at the outset to recall an ancestral touch point for all of us here in the legacy of Ifwa Sutherland, who was the Ghanaian writer and educator and cultural activist, and the Pan-Africanist founder of Mofra Foundation, because her understanding of play as a key element in the building blocks of children's development and in urban planning was well ahead of its time, as far back as the 1960s. I'm happy to say that there'll be a webinar specifically looking at this urban legacy on October 22nd during this festival, which I hope you can all look in on. So our mainly outdoor-based programs are comprehensive in scope. They encompass literacy in all its forms, music, theater and the arts, public health campaigns, civic awareness, leadership training, design thinking, climate science, nature study, and more. We, in 2012, launched the Playtime in Africa initiative, which I lead. And it includes a park that now serves as a natural learning environment and a child-centered community hub. And this is the spot from which we champion equal access to open public space for children across the city. So as the first African City chapter in the Conscious Cities Festival, we're truly honored to invite representative practitioners and thought leaders from sister cities on the African continent to join us in getting the Conscious Accra event off to a great start. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Next, we have Karima Grant, and I love what you said about creativity being so critical for the future of the continent. I personally feel creatives will save us, the young people, in terms of their vibrancy, their thoughts. And so, really great to have you on this panel. If you can share more about you and the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. It's an honor. I've been sitting with most of the women around here for a number of years, exchanging privately and then publicly in other forums around children and around play. So this is just lovely to be here and lovely to be with you, Ori. So it's nice to see the momentum growing and more space that we're taking up in the name of children and African children specifically. My name is Karima Grant. I'm the founder and director of Imagination Africa. Imagination Africa is a social enterprise that's about equipping African children with the tools they need to become change makers. We do this through an ecosystem approach. We work with parents, with institutions, with teachers, and most of all, we create child-centered spaces. Our hub space in Dakar, Curry Imagination, is for children 6 months to 12 years old. And as you can see here, like all of my sisters across this conversation, is that we just engage in all kinds of ways in using play to really bring out the best that we know children have, to really provide environments that can really provoke how children learn and how children develop. We're very clear. Research has demonstrated that between 0 and 5 is when 95% of the brain development is happening for our children. And we know in Africa, we have all the tools, all the strengths, and we have really creative environments that we can use to really support and develop tomorrow's leaders. So at Imagination Africa, at our hub space, Curry Imagination, we work to build the capacity of the ecosystem as well as provide spaces for children to thrive. So thank you.
Thank you, Karima. Next, we will have Julian. If you can share more about, it looks like a beautiful space and work that you're doing in Rwanda, the Play Hub, and about a bit more about your background as well.
Thanks, Ori, for doing this, and it's great to be in the same space with these amazing women. All of you are doing amazing work. My name is Kaiwanda Ngabre Julian, and I'm the founder and director of the Playground Hub, which is a social enterprise that is aiming at redefining play and reimagining learning. Our work is really centered around transforming children's lives through play-based learning to ensure that they thrive and become lifelong learners. We've centered or focused on building a community that believes in the power of play, whether it is unstructured or structured play, to unleash children's potential. And one of the ways we are doing this is, one, we are leveraging local materials and local skills to build play spaces for children that are of quality and inclusive. We are also advising city developers and city planners on how to incorporate play or to design for children, for people that are coming up with real estates, those who are designing the city. Kigali is an upcoming city, but also Rwanda is generally a country that is being redesigned. And so we're trying to advise on how best to redesign with the child's mind. The other things also, we are doing a lot of advocacy to ensure that generally parents, policymakers, and everybody in the community understands the power of play in terms of child development. One of the things that we've been doing recently is Rwanda has started creating car-free zones. And so what we're trying to do is, how do we make sure that in terms of bringing up spaces for adults, we're more focused also on including children, because we're focused on building car-free zones where people can go and carry out different activities and exercise and keep fit and healthy. But many of these cities are excluding children. So what we're trying to do is advise on how best to improve this. And the other things also, we're providing training for communities on how to come up with their own or design their own play environments for children. And that's really much about the Playground Hub. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And finally, we have Gretchen. My dream one day is to have a play museum in Nairobi. So looking forward to learning more from you and about the amazing work that you're doing in South Africa.
Thank you. I just want to echo again all of my colleagues and say how honored we are to be here with you and with each other. I think we all look to each other for inspiration and energy when we're feeling like this is a job that is tireless, and we are working all, I think, very hard for the work that we're doing. So Play Africa is a social enterprise, and we are really reimagining what a children's museum can look like in an urban African context. We're based in Johannesburg, where we use the city itself as our museum, and we work with partners, including partners within city and provincial government, to transform public spaces, to create what we call shared, inclusive, and equitable spaces for play and learning. What we do is try to take the built environment and promote spatial equity and play equity in a society that is extremely divided and characterized by exclusion. We take really flexible models to install around the city, and we create transformative play-based learning experiences for children wherever they are. While we're based inside a former prison at Constitution Hill in Johannesburg, which is now a human rights precinct, we also go to children where they are in parks, in community centers, in school halls, on streets, on street corners, rooftops, and we create STEAM and STEM activities, as well as unstructured play and facilitated programs for problem solving, innovation, creativity, collaboration, and also human connection. And doing this, we do this with children, but we also do it with parents as well as educators, offering training and other kinds of experiences to bring children and families and educators together so they can take the global thinking around education and play and apply it and replicate it in their own homes and in their classrooms and in their communities. So in doing that, we're doing a lot of work around design thinking about how to do this with children, which I'll speak about a little bit later. And we're also creating opportunities for children to advocate for themselves through play. And I think the final thing is just to say that, just to echo Karima, that during this time of COVID-19, we're really thinking a lot about how this work is so critical and how we can use some of this work that we're doing in our cities, not just here in Johannesburg, but beyond, to think about how to continue to connect people both through technology, but also in shared public spaces. So that's a little bit about what we're doing.
Thank you. And without further ado, we'll jump right into the conversation. And I'll start with you, Karima. We've talked about play and the different ways that you're thinking about play in children. Why is play so important when you're thinking about urban design from your perspective?
I think as we've heard from all of the colleagues here and all of the institutions and organizations here, is that play is much, much more than just what children do. It is actually the best way that human beings learn. And so that when we take the time to integrate play into urban spaces, we are automatically creating a conduit about a human-centered design, about how we put humans at the core of what we do. Because when we think about play, we think about how children play. Children rarely play by themselves. They always play with other children. They play with siblings, right? They play, there's usually caregivers around. So when we're designing for play and we're designing for children's play, we're designing for all those elements that children naturally bring with them, all the people that children naturally bring with them. So thinking about play is an opportunity for us to really rethink and reimagine how cities can have a human being at its center. And the opportunity, I think, that we have right now with redesigning cities with play at its heart is an opportunity for really to make a city at the service of children. To put cities, at Imagination Africa, we talk about learning environments and how important now we know environments are actually critical to brain development. And so one of the things we talk about is that all these public spaces should be at the service of children's learning. As you said, we have the youngest continent. So the opportunity to put play in the center of design is the opportunity to make cities actually serve children and actually serve children's learning and children's growth and development.
And just building on that, Julian, you're a bit more fortunate than some of us in cities that are already very baked, and we're having to undo a whole lot of messes and public land that's been grabbed. You have Kigali, that's, as you said, and Rwanda overall, where you're kind of rebuilding, right, in the process of a lot of change and perhaps a real opportunity to come in from the ground up. So can you share maybe how do you infuse that process when you're trying to do advocacy? And also you mentioned something I thought was interesting about you design with children, right? So what are the kids saying when you're designing with them? What are they telling you that they want to see?
Yeah, I think Rwanda has an opportunity to actually reimagine children's environment because we kind of are still, a virgin country. Lots of things are still coming up now, and I think it's a great opportunity for us to redesign. And I must say, even while everybody thinks we are almost there when it comes to, the beauty of the spaces, I think much of what we are doing is really putting up infrastructure that we didn't have before, and we're making sure that we don't look like Kenya and Uganda and all these other countries that are close to us. But I think there's something that we're missing. We have beautiful cities, right? But they're not really child-friendly yet. And for children, the environments where infants and young children spend time can greatly influence their daily experiences and contribute to the overall health, and not just of children, but also of their caregivers and everybody that is around them. So I think our advocacy work is really so much based on that we still have that opportunity. We have not yet gone so much far. And whatever else that we are putting up, there's a lot of real estate coming up. We have lots of buildings coming up. A lot of slum areas are being, pulled down, and new things are coming up. So that's an opportunity that we can really use to make sure that in trying to redesign and redefine the city or the country, we're also having a child's lens. So that's my key advocacy point in Rwanda. And one of the things I mentioned earlier, I'm working with Kigali City on, is to advise on how best to incorporate child-friendly and inclusive spaces. We have something that has come up called the car-free zone. I think some countries have it as well. And what we're trying to do is it's been set up as a model for adults, but what I've been advising the cities, what kind of environments should we be able to incorporate that can accommodate children? And the other thing about it, this particular model is also very good because it's not central to the city. It can be extended towards residential areas. So everybody has an environment that is close to them that they can go and relax, and whether it is parents and whether it is children. So they'll have a close environment that is appropriate for children. Talking about designing with children, there's a particular project that I'm working on with the Right to Play International, and it's called Do It Yourself Playgrounds. It's an amazing project because Right to Play is one of those organizations that also believes in applying play in child development. But this is a new model that they're trying to do where we mobilize parents and children to come and tell us what they want in terms of play and their play environments. And children come up with all sorts of things, and it's actually very interesting because when we talk about design, I remember I was talking to a friend, we were talking about, I think even this group, we spoke about it and saying, we are not designers, we're not architects, we're not engineers, but we actually have to understand the design to be able to advise whoever else is actually, an official or a qualified designer. So what we've been doing is we've been training people on actually how to think and design for children, even when they're not designers. And it's one of the trainings I've also had myself as somebody who advocates for children's playful learning and environments. So it's something really that is interesting because kids really come up with what they really want. And they come up with things that are culturally in context. It's very important because cultures are different on the African continent, even the whole world, but also even within the country, you have different people having different experiences. So for a kid to come up with a particular game is because that's what they know, that's what they've seen, or that's what they've experienced. And then what we do at the end of the day is get whatever they've come up with, design it, install it, and then blend in a bit of what is new for them to help them now develop other skills and also be able to feel like if they were to move from one city to another, they feel like they've seen this before. It's not like, they get that cultural shock when it comes to play. So it's really interesting. The other thing also is, using local materials. One of the things that we do is really to ensure that people understand that play doesn't have to be expensive. They can exploit whatever is within their communities as long as they understand the importance of play for child development and even for everybody that interacts with children. So it's having those environments that are actually made out of materials that surround their communities is very, very key. So those are some of the things that we've really been advocating about and trying to help people understand. Schools, communities, policymakers. Policies have to be made, they have to include children when they're making policies. So it's one of those things that we're really pushing for.
Thank you. And I'll come back to you, Gretchen, with a similar question. But I think there's a thread, Julian, that you brought around culture. And I think, Amoy, with the work that you're doing, both in Ghana and as you highlighted with for Sutherland and documenting that, maybe can you speak to, answer this similar question, why is play such an important conversation, that particularly within a cultural context in a region and based on what you've been documenting over the years as far as the role of play?
Right, so play is embedded in our cultures in Ghana in ways that I think we've forgotten, because it seems as though the formal school system, which has a particular colonial history, in some ways has disrupted that confidence, in absorbing knowledge and acquiring skills through play, which is one of the ways in which traditionally, I'm amazed at seeing maybe a, 4, 5, 6-year-old child, who is playing the drums or the xylophones or, dancing adwa, which is one of our classic dances. And you just wonder, how did this child learn to do this? And then they look at you shyly and they just say, when the grown-ups are doing it, then I watch, or, it's things like that that really fascinate me, and I feel as though, we ought to have a great deal more confidence in the capacity and richness of our own indigenous cultures to supply opportunities for play, and that we should be looking into those more than we do. The unfortunate thing right now has been this kind of cutting off of play from learning, which many contemporary parents feel. If your child is playing, they are not learning. And this is really a concept that we desperately need to undo. So, all of which is to say that in our work, and I just dive, into culture. I will look at something like the, what is sometimes called Mancala. I'm sure there's a name for it in every country, which is the pit and pebble game, which is ubiquitous across Africa and has been for thousands of years, So we look at it and we say, okay, how do we make this game, a standard part of the play space, whether we're using scavenged, wood from trees that have been cut down in the city to create these sort of giant installations that people can play with, just drawing from culture all the time. First of all, because it's the logical thing to do. These are the, materials that are around us, So I think that there are many, many, many ways in which culture is a resource for play.
And, it's interesting. I think, and Gretchen, you mentioned COVID. Many of us, what I'm seeing, particularly in Nairobi, or urban, where everyone was locked down in apartments with no playgrounds, where school used to play that function, and people seeing how miserable their children were and just say, oh my, what have we done? I think I saw a lot of younger parents saying, this is just miserable. There's nowhere for them to go out to play. They can only sit on the TV for so long, especially if they've been doing some form of virtual learning. And I think a much more conscious, I think it's creating a sort of wait, where are all the public spaces? I remember when we could go out. I mean, the Karura forest was just packed with people looking for some green, some open spaces. You're seeing a lot of people rethinking whether they need to be in Nairobi or a smaller city because they can work remotely. So it doesn't really matter where they are, and at least the kids have some green space. I think that it's been just a reminder we've just restricted, as you said, there's play and there's learning, and we've lost a lot. My kids had to, by I think month 3, we had sort of exhausted the repertoire of things. And we got together as moms and started teaching them the games we used to play, which were made out of, materials and there's a game called Shake. And it was quite interesting and they loved it. And I was like, why hadn't we done this before? Because we do have, as you said, culturally, play and creativity was very embedded, and we're losing something by being very restricted. So Gretchen, I think you also do work around co-design, and you said something that struck me as very powerful. It's not just about bringing kids to a venue or a space, which might not always be possible, that you also go to where they are. And sometimes that could be on the streets, on the rooftops, roaming around in the estates. Tell me a bit more about how you think about, that sort of a space, but also going to where they are, and how do you think about co-creating, co-designing with kids?
Yeah, thank you. So you're right. I think we were on a journey when we started Play Africa as a children's museum. We felt and still believe that children deserve dedicated spaces to their play and learning, and they deserve world-class museum facilities like they could have anywhere around the world. And that's something that's part of our long-term strategy. But what we realized in our journey was that we had to kind of throw out the playbook about how to create a children's museum in our local context when there are so many competing challenges, and when apartheid era and colonial era spatial injustice and spatial inequalities continue to exist to this day. So we realized quickly that even though we do bring children together in shared spaces in our Constitution Hill facility, we also really believe powerfully in going where children are, again, in those different kinds of spaces to bring children together. And I think especially in a COVID era, when we have issues around mental health and social support, which are so needed, when the lockdown happened, our first thought was that we were going to bring through technology, through WhatsApp videos, how to play with your children and how to engage with your children. And that's something that we have done. But the first thing that we realized once we reached out to our audiences who live in inner city flats, who live in backyard shacks, is that it felt so isolated and so alone. And the first time we called someone who we hadn't seen for a while, whom we know has a son with autism and a son who is neurotypical, we said, how are you doing? We just wanted to see how you are. She burst into tears and said, I thought that everyone had forgotten about me. I'd been here 10 days alone in this shack, and I can't go out because there's a dog outside and my son's afraid of dogs. So we started to realize that the role that we play is not just about children's learning, it's about connecting with one another and creating spaces for people to connect with one another. And I think that psychosocial support and mental health support has really driven a lot of our work, where we've been on the phones and we've been using WhatsApp to really connect with people and help introduce different ways of play to those children. In terms of co-designing physical spaces, that's something that we really have a lot of passion for. And we do that with children at the center. And so we've developed an approach using design thinking and human-centered design to introduce children to the concept that they can be inventors and innovators and creating spaces and relating to their neighborhood. So we give them this process to go through that uses empathy and really understanding how other children might be feeling in their own context to be able to amplify their voice, and then give them tools like ideation and prototyping to help create new scenarios and new solutions. And then we prototype them using really quick and low cost and smart design technologies that can then be implemented, so they can help kind of see the process from using empathy and ideation and prototyping to creating a product that can be installed in their neighborhood and be informed by them. And that helps them create a space where they can have their feelings heard and their voices heard, but it also gives them a chance to practice problem solving and creativity and collaboration and communicating with each other. And it helps give them a sense that they see their impact on urban spaces. So it's been really powerful to see what kids come up with. A lot of it has to do in our context here in Johannesburg and inner city Johannesburg with children's safety. So a lot of the prototyping that comes up from children is, here's a special necklace I can wear that in case someone tries to kidnap me, I can push this button, or I have got this video camera that can be around me so the person who I know is going to abuse me can be videotaped and I can take it to the police. There's stuff that children say that I'm gonna have this robot bodyguard walk next to me so that I could be safe. So there's a lot of stuff that comes up for children who, ages 7 to 11, that really amplifies kind of the need for feeling safe and secure in their own public space. And I think what we try to do is surface this work and then really work with those children, and sometimes with the help of social workers, to really process that and then create safe spaces where they feel like they can really thrive and be seen and heard and valued.
So just while I have you on, and I'll ask everyone about this, since I think I've been struck by such resources that sit within you as individuals and within your organizations that we definitely need to, as the young ones would say, gas you up and, and put the word out. What's something that a project that's come out of your work or an initiative that you're particularly proud of?
I think from my side, just to follow on, I think a lot of the work that we've done around creating exhibits and programs, facilitated programs that really help children express themselves and make their voices heard. So in South Africa, in our context, in our young democracy here, we really believe powerfully in the Constitution and the values of the Constitution and helping amplify children's participation in our democracy. So we do work around introducing children to the concept of making your voice heard through peaceful assembly, through holding signs about issues that you care about your rights as children. We introduce children through play to a children's courtroom environment where they advocate for themselves and the issues that they care about through role play. And that's a very powerful experience for thousands and thousands of children. We also do work around introducing children about the process of voting and what does it mean to go through the process of voting and participating in a democracy. And so we do mock elections where we give them an ID card and they queue up, they have to check their thing, they get their thumb marked, they go and vote in a ballot, a little ballot booth, and then voting booth, and then they cast their ballot, and then we see the results of their election. So those kinds of programs I think have been really powerful and help really create a space for children to feel like they are learning the tools to participate in a vibrant democracy in the future. And that's something that we see installed now around our city, which is really exciting.
Very cool. Kariba, anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I think it's always so great. I just have to say this. It's so great to hear your colleagues share, because then you feel like, oh, okay, we're all doing this work and we're all in it. It really promises that these generation of young people across the continent are really going to be such a powerful generation, even though we know they already are. But just all these inputs are just so very powerful and transformative. I think the work that we are particularly most proud of is a lot of the work, as Julian mentioned, as everyone is actually doing, is advocacy work. We did some work with children. It was a project that was supported by the Van Leer Foundation called Walking with Amadou. But the idea was really, how can we use children to really tell us the story about what their experiences are like in public spaces? It was a very simple process of taking 3-year-olds, a very chatty 3-year-old named Sukaina, and her friend Antoinette, otherwise known as Antu, and we put GoPros on them, and we just followed them into different kinds of public spaces. And their reaction and their feedback and just even their viewpoint gave us so much information. It just gave us a tremendous amount of information about how children's real life experiences are. We accompanied that. We worked with, and I think this is another really important element, is we partnered with the tech sector. Because I think sometimes when we talk about children, very often, I think, and my colleagues would probably agree, we get relegated to the education sector. So, there's already an educational agenda. Africa's already got its educational agenda. So you all just sit down and be quiet behind it. But the thing that we forget is children are citizens, and they actually, every aspect of life touches them. So there's not one sector that should not be concerned or contributing to children's well-being. So for us, we've been working and partnering with some really innovative companies here on the tech side. And we worked with one to do a human-centered design study where we collected data in partnership with different communities, with 2 different communities, about what the experience of caregivers were like in public spaces and then on public transportation. And the result of that information was really Senegal's first real data collected on what it's like to be a caregiver moving through public transportation with a baby on your back, what it's like to be a mother moving with a 3-year-old on your side and a mother and having to work in a place like a market and where their needs were. And I think what really came up for us were all the places that we could now advocate and where we could form stronger partnerships. On top of that, what we did is we used that and we used the video. And again, we worked with children from a community again to work with local architects and to work with local filmmakers to be able to really capture their communities and tell us the story. So I think combined, what it did was it gave us just, I think, a really rare opportunity to see Dakar in particular from the viewpoint of children, and from the viewpoint of children as one, I won't say what commune he came from, but one of our local government officials was like, what does a baby have to say about anything? He's always on his mother's back. That's enough. Like he doesn't have, they don't occupy space. So for them to have voice and for them to be able to really there, I think it was very shocking for a lot of people to understand actually what is at stake, what is really at stake. So we've been very, very proud of that work, and have been very proud about how that work has kind of fed into other people looking at that work and thinking about it and thinking about, oh, okay, have we thought about things from a children's perspective? So that was a great project that we were really proud of. And what's nice is we have data, because now data can help us tell a story that I think in so many ways we don't always have. We have what I call UNICEF data, the big data on children, but we rarely have the data of daily lives, of daily spaces, of caregivers, of mothers, of parents, of all economic backgrounds that help us tell us what it's really like in our African cities, actually.
I love that. I think it's brilliant, and especially the GoPro. And that's what prompted my tweet. Like, if we thought about it, like from a 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old navigating a city and what that looks like for them, and then you can't even argue with it, right? It's like right there. This is how much it sucks, and this is why you need to fix it.
Even the comments that the children would say. At one point, we had the 3-year-old who said to us, "Oh, look at that! That's so ugly. Who would want to be there?" And we were like, "Oh, sorry."
It's true, yeah. And kids they're unfiltered at that stage, right? So whatever comes to mind at those stage, and I think and really important points, and probably I'm guilty of that as well, is just tying it into then the education, and early childhood education and so on. But that this is their life, the full spectrum of their life, and then that opens you up to different partners, as you've said, technology partners. It could be, FMCG in terms of how do you think about your future demographics and reach them and the challenges that they have. So really super interesting. Amoi, anything you'd like to share in terms of something you're particularly proud of? And then I'll round up with you, Julia.
Yes, so in the process, over the last maybe 8 to 10 years of just learning how to hold space within, the city of Accra, that is to say physical as well as, conceptual space for children within the city. We've been very fortunate to have a physical, small 1 acre, but in, a crowded city, that's a lot of space in which to model some of the ideas that we have. And, we recognize that, the limitations of a site-specific project are that, you cannot replicate this whole park, anymore. The city just does not have the room for it. So the challenge was, how do we make this a really flexible, model that can operate at many different levels, for young people in the city. And so I'm really happy that, you could call us an outdoor classroom, you could call us a green lab, you could call us an innovation space, a maker space, but this is a place for thinking and doing, in a child-centered way, in many, many different ways that is then disseminated across the city. So we are not apologetic for having a model site, because people do need to come and see something that is working. At least in the Ghanaian context, people really benefit from that. And so just very quickly, one specific initiative was that we've always worked with local materials, and one of the best places to find them is in the market. And as you know, the West African market is a female-dominated space, which means that there are lots and lots of children who also spend all day in the market with their mothers. And these are preschool children, who, may need a little bit more stimulation. So we have this wonderful symbiotic relationship that we've developed, where we buy materials in the market, which could be, cooking paddles or mats or all sorts of things that we then bring to the park and then work on them, to create new products, to repurpose them into, loose parts play, learning materials, and then reinsert them into the market, where the children who are in the market can benefit from them. And the market women who are, these women don't play, it's like, if you're buying something for us, then we're listening, but the fact that we're actually able to source things from them so that there's an economic benefit, and then at the same time, they can see, how their children can play. And we have even had early childhood educators go into the market and explain, why it is that it's important for your 1-year-old, your 2-year-old, your 3-year-old to be able to come into this corridor, and have manipulatives, or, just, things made from calabash and so on, hanging from, the ceiling of the walkway and things like that. So we really hope that we can extend that idea throughout the markets in Accra and across the country. And that would be a fantastic thing, but it has all started from, this one park space.
That is amazing. It just has me thinking, when we talk about local solutions for local problems, right? And this could be a whole other conversation, where I was just thinking about some, big UNICEF or whatever, very large organization, experts flying in and coming to say, this is how you design playgrounds and all sorts of things. And we don't need that. We know, and it's context driven, and that's why it works, because as you're saying, you're addressing. No intervention that doesn't address that. So are you buying something or what? Or what are you telling us? Unless you embed it in the reality, let's say, of the market dynamics, it's just never going to either catch on or be sustainable. So I love, and I hope this will be my second last question of how can we do more about sharing the learnings that we're even just in this hour already, so much rich data is coming out. Julian, we'll end with you. Anything you want us to gas you up about and say that's pretty phenomenal?
Yeah, before I get to that, Amo, you remind me I need to share with you something about the markets and other things when it comes to play and playful environments. Yeah, so with the Playground Hub, one of the things that we really kicked off with was advocacy. And like Karima said, and this is probably, it's definitely common. Once people don't understand why playful learning or playful environments and safe environments for children are very, very important, they will not take any action. In our case, for example, in Rwanda, up until 2012, we didn't have anything around early childhood development, not even a policy, nothing. And so the first time the policy was up, It was very vague. It didn't even look like it's a child policy thing, you know. So there was a lot of work that needed to be done. And later on, as we launched into the early childhood development space, it was evident that we only cared about nutrition and nothing else. So we was focused on making sure that kids are getting the right feeding. But then, you know, with the poverty levels and everything, you know, if a parent didn't have food for their children and not enough, you know, then they were just disappointed and there was nothing going on. So my very, very first point, and this is actually, I think, how I met Karima the first time, it was through advocacy. And my advocacy was, you know, around how do we create, you know, strategic, inclusive, safe environments for children to thrive. You know, all the way from making sure that they're eating in the right spaces, they're learning in the right spaces, the homes as much as they may not be economically empowered or not socially safe, but how do we make sure that, you know, everybody understands that a child within the right environment will thrive? So I was very, very focused on making sure that people understand first that environments, the kind of environments that children thrive in, you know, are supposed to be in this way, not this way. So it was great for me because, you know, along the way people started understanding how that works. And then the other thing was really, how do we make sure that they're affordable? How do we make sure that we don't think importation when we think of creating environments for children? And so on one of my first projects was doing research on what materials are available in the country that we can leverage to make sure that we set up. I liked the way Amoy talked about setting up models that they can come and learn. It was one of my strategies as well. You know, I worked with a number of organizations, including UNICEF, to create a model playground. And one of the first model playgrounds that we created, one was in the biggest refugee camp here in Rwanda. We do have about 2 big refugee camps that have about 40,000 children that are from Burundi. And so this was a new space. They didn't have schools, they didn't have hospitals, they had nothing. And so while many of the organizations, especially the multinationals and the UN organizations are trying to set up, you know, provide infrastructure for this huge camp, I approached them and I said, you know, you have this huge number of children. How are you going to make sure that, you know, they keep within, they be children in their space? How to make sure that they, even though they're refugees, but how to make sure that, you know, they're keeping on as children. And so I partnered with UNICEF and Save the Children, and we put up the biggest play park in that camp. And today it's really been a great, it's been a great model for whoever comes by because they can see that you don't have to really make it expensive for children to access these special, these safe environments. The other thing was about really ensuring that they have safety, because one of the challenges also we had was how do you make sure that you're developing using safe materials, because these environments have to be safe for the children. And so it was important that, you know, we start looking at what materials are available that can keep them safe. The other thing that I'm particularly proud of is the car-free zones that are coming up within the Kigali city. It's one of the things that is being really being promoted. But along with that, because they were not providing space for children, what we came up with was a strategy for them to increase the spaces across the city and other cities that are coming up, but also have model playgrounds in the cities. So we actually just got a grant to put up 2 model playgrounds within the city. So which means that any other homeowners in different estates can actually copy that model, can learn from it and go and put up on their own, you know. So I think modeling for the communities and making sure that you bring environments, children's environments closer to them has been one of the key things that we found to be working, and we found to be quite sustainable and affordable for our communities and children in general.
So rich there. And I think a point I want to come back to you, Amori. How do we, based on your experience around both modeling and, you know, putting this groups like this together to have these important conversations, on your wish list of what more we could do to strengthen learning and practice networks and sort of push this from, make this agenda bigger, like the thing. Someone was asking me, I was being interviewed about a youth strategy for an organization. And I was like, as we were talking, I said, wait a minute, we're past youth strategy now. If you look at the demographics, youth are the strategy. Like, you can't be talking about having a youth strategy. And at some point, you can't even be talking about having a children's strategy because they'll be the majority of the citizens. That should be the strategy. It's like, how do you cater for young people? Because they're 70% of the continent and not, the 10, 12, whatever it used to be. So what more can we do to strengthen learning and practice networks and to move, if you had a wish list, this agenda forward in your view?
Do we even have the time? But I mean, you're quite right. I mean, when you look at the median age of Africa, which I think is about 18, I seem to remember Fred Swaneker putting it, really dramatically a couple of years ago about, how soon Africa is going to have the continent with, the most children. I think the next continents are almost, twice, are almost twice as old, so it's a really major issue. And, this group that we have here in this forum have been talking around this, between ourselves, as we do, the essential work in our different parts of the continent. And I think it's absolutely critical that we need to establish some sort of a, knowledge hub, an African clearing house, because we all have, a pretty kind of deep bench now of practice, of knowledge that we should absolutely share. I think the kind of intra-African exchange is really, really important now. And it also means that if we're able to form a hub like that, let's call it the Africa Play Network, any kind of incoming, support, would recognize that we are the practitioners and the people, who they go through. So I'd like to hear from Karima and Gretchen and Julian what they think about that.
I was actually going to open it up. Anyone, Karima or Gretchen, anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think, thank you. I mean, I think one of the things that's always in danger here in Africa is that when somebody realizes something about Africa, then you have the swarms of the consultants and the organizations that have come in. And amongst ourselves, we've had long conversations because I think, as you see with every single one of these organizations that are here, their work is years deep. So there's lots of learning, there's lots of trial and error, lots of prototyping, lots of also things that can be scaled up. And what we're noticing is that the more that we're talking about play and the more that we're talking about placemaking and creating spaces, particularly around children and their communities, the more that we're getting a lot of outside impact, which I think fundamentally it's always great to be in exchange. But all of the knowledge and all of the work that I think is here should be the thing that we really want to raise up. I think the wish list is also too, is how do, I always feel like that the work here in Africa is strengthening the conversations. I remember way back in the 80s when we had to call each other and there was like clicks on the line and then the 10-second wait and that's there. Now we have these opportunities. So how do we strengthen these kind of dialogues in between spaces? Because it helps raise the visibility. So I think something like an African Play Network is something that's so powerful because it's now something that can inform policy, that can inform education, can inform design, it can inform so many aspects because it's concerned about African children and not just African children in the small little context we want to have them in, but in their entirety in terms of who they are. You mentioned that they're citizens for tomorrow, but the thing that I think all of us are reckoning with is what are their rights today as a citizen? And if we deprive them at age 2 or 3 of rights, what kind of citizen is going to be engaged with government? much later. If since the age of 2 onward, they've had no kind of respectful relationship with government or with policymakers. So I think we're really talking about a strategy today to address these questions as core questions of citizenship. So I think it's a brilliant idea, Amawi. Brilliant. But we know the people you have here. We have big players here. So bravo, bravo.
I am taking notes and I love it. I'm like, we're not talking about the citizens of the future. It's today, it's now. We don't have time.
May I just
Question?
amplify? I think just to share and to add on, I think I agree completely that the Africa Play Network is a fantastic idea that's time has truly come. And I think one thing that really unites us is really about centering the child in Africa as part of these conversations, as a full and capable and vibrant citizen, full of assets, full of potential, full of the capacity to solve their own problems, to challenge themselves, to identify themselves as change makers and citizens from a very, very young age. I think one thing that all of us who've been in dialogue and conversation for years, through Skype, through technology, before we even knew what Zoom was, we were having these conversations to support each other, to champion each other, to back each other up, because we shared this real passion and commitment that we weren't looking at the African child as a child with deficits, but as a child that is full of everything he or she needs now to thrive in the future. And so I think that we really feel very strongly that for one another, we really believe in each other's work and we believe in each other's vision of the African child, and believe that is something that counters a narrative that oftentimes comes from the global North or the global West, that comes to tell us what to do about play on the continent. And I think that what I'd like just to amplify what my colleagues have said is that we feel like we are steeped in experience and evidence and practice and data that oftentimes we lack the resources to leverage to its fullest potential. So, we've gone through programs where we've collected children's voices from more than 2,000 children, and we just don't have the capacity to do the kind of analysis, because we're now moving on to other programs and we're trying to serve more and more children. And it's oftentimes simply just a simple lack of capacity to be able to do even more with that work. So again, I'm all for it. Sign me up, and I'm there to add my voice and to add our organization's contributions to this network.
If I could just quickly kind of nip in with something more for the wish list, which is when we talk about the resources. As Karima said, very often when you think about children, it's nutrition, education, and you're sort of locked in there. But, I would really, advocate for technology companies, for engineering companies, for construction companies and design. I mean, these are all entities that can actually do a great deal of the work, that we need. There was a road company that was in Ghana some years ago that called us and said, look, we're building this road, and through every village that we go, we're thinking about putting a playground, using, the tires and all of those, materials and we ended up not working with them, but we thought that kind of thinking is really important, So there are these unexpected, resources that I think that we really can leverage.
So it sounds to me that there's also a narrative, and then I'll close off with my last question, maybe a reshaping, because I suspect from an outside looking in, there was a bit of damage done by those, pump water or on the seesaw, and, kind of play and generate some solar electricity, I don't know, as you're riding something. So it was always, and I was a strong advocate for this when I was in the tech sector, because there used to be like, what's tech for education? How are Africans going to use the internet to learn how to fish? And I'm like, we want to do the same things everyone else does. Like, there is no internet for Africa. We want to, watch entertainment, listen to music, sports, browse endlessly all day, watch porn. It's the same thing. Like there's no one who gets a phone and is like, oh my God, I'm now going to self-empower myself. It happens just naturally. And I think, I suspect play, perhaps as those of you in the space, there's some work around a narrative that you have to unpack, because there was for a long time, to the extent that resources were coming in, it was play, but with an like what's the upside, right? Like what's the, IQ levels are good. Like it was always utilitarian and not just taken for an as is and as a right and as something, as a dignified way. And so reshaping that and getting away from the narrative that you always have to tie it to some SDG or whatever is so critical, because I think once you get out of that and bring in other partners, whether it's tech and so on, becomes easier because you can fit it into whatever their interest or their agenda is, and not a very narrow one, as you keep pointing to, Karima. So with that, I think final word, we're almost at time. Best practice suggestion, or those of you who are listening, and I think I'll start with you, Gillian, because you're doing really, I love that point of it's not just about government and roads, and maybe you're thinking about your estate, there's a little piece of land there, you don't know where to start. You're a parent, you want to get together with other parents and think about how you're certainly seeing places like Kenya where schools, just a mess. Parents are organizing, creating little pods and little, play dates, and thinking, oh my gosh, we need to get our kids out of this urban concrete area. What are some resources or suggestions? I'll start with you, Gillian, then Gretchen, then Karima, and then end with Amori, in terms of folks who want to incorporate playful or child-friendly design.
In terms of designing for children, I think we really need to think of, safety in terms of how do we design for children for them to really thrive in their own spaces. And so I think leveraging every space, it doesn't have to be a huge park, it doesn't have to be in a school, it's a healthcare center, it's a prison, it's a museum, it's any space that is available. As long as when we look at the space, we have a children's lens with that. So I think really one of the key things that should be a takeaway is that when we look at space, let's think children first. Let's think children, because when we think children, then we think of everybody else, because children interact with caregivers, they interact with parents, they interact with everybody. So as long as we incorporate, whether it is at policy level or at implementation level, as long as we have a child's lens, then we have captured everybody else, the adults, and we need to be very, very inclusive in terms of quality, and inclusive in terms of designing our spaces. Because when you look at, for example, in my country, many of the buildings, if you look at many of the buildings, really, you walk in with kids and, there are stairs, kids will be falling off and, all these things. So I think it's very, very important to be aware that every space has to think of a kid. Every space that is designed, we need to be thinking of kids. But very important, that it's not rocket science. What is it that we have in our cultures, in our contexts, in our informal settings that we can really exploit, that we can leverage to make sure that kids, have environments that are very friendly, and for them when they look, because a child will play in any space as long as they have some space to play in. So it's very important for us to understand the awareness is very, very key from policy level to community, to understand that, first of all, play matters in a child's life and in their development. It's very good for their mental health. It's very good for generally their development. So I think for me, the key takeaway is that let's exploit whatever space we have in our communities. Let's use our local materials and local skills to develop that, and let's design with children, because we are not making these things for us. We are creating a generation that understands that environments where children thrive are very, very important. those are some of the things that, and we shouldn't limit the spaces that we're looking at. You know, you have children growing up in prisons, you have children on the streets, and all these are children that need to be taken care of. So it's very important that every environment that we have, we redesign and redefine the spaces where children are growing.
So design with children, and it's not rocket science. That's the Twitter version of that. Gretchen?
I mean, I think one of the takeaways is that I really feel like I'm sitting on a panel of true experts, and the expertise that is in this forum is something that I think is something I'd never take for granted. I always come away with just a deep and profound respect for my colleagues on this platform. And I'd really love to amplify and just to continue to lift up the work of my colleagues. It's something I really value. I think for me, the one takeaway I'd like to share is this concept called "nothing about us without us," and it's a phrase that's been used by many different movements around to push for inclusion, including in the South African disability rights sector. But in "nothing about us without us," for me, means on the behalf of children, that children, I believe we need to see differently. And that happens not just here in the continent, but globally, that we need to see children as geniuses. They are absolute and utter geniuses who are full and complete citizens from the moment they're born, and they are consistently learning and thriving and growing. And we are here to help be a voice for them, and to say nothing about us without us on behalf of children. So for us, everything that we do is really puts children and their rights at the center. And I think that one of the reasons why I have such deep respect for my colleagues here is their, I think, embracing of that concept. And I just can't say enough about how proud I am to be here amongst them and how grateful I am. So thank you very much. And thank you for your amazing job at moderating. I really appreciate it. It's really fantastic.
Thank you. Karima?
Gretchen, if you make me cry,
Yeah.
we put some makeup. We're not crying, okay? No crying on Zoom. Do you agree for that?
No crying.
Yeah, this is us. I think we might as well bring ourselves into this conversation at this level, because I think this is the kind of thing that we have to do for each other.
You should have put me before Gretchen. Now everything's a mess.
No, the moderator says
you,
no
Gretchen,
crying.
I think that kind of sentiment is really very reassuring. I think one of the things about best practice that I would offer, just building on what Gretchen said and what Julian is the power of partnerships. And I think it's time for us to be as transformative as it is thinking is who are the new partners and what do they need to know? You know, there's not, you know, we're very lucky in Africa that, you know, one of the core principles is that, you know, you must be a parent. Now we know how that's oppressing in many ways, but we also know that this is a core tenet in most African societies, is this essential part of identity of being a parent. But yet and still, if we look at all our policies, we do everything but support parents, we do everything but support children. And I think, you know, if we can begin to think, and I think this is addressed to us as practitioners, this is addressed to people who are working in design spaces, is who needs to be in the conversation, who's missing at the table. You know, I think as Gretchen said, as Julian said, there's always children that are always missing from these conversations. But, you know, there are always other people. I think you had the excellent example. I just felt you so hard, Amoi, when we were talking about, you know, all of the construction that's being done. You know, what is it going to take for them to sit in a room and understand about the impact of the first 5 years of life and how they can make a huge change? It can make more of a change if all the construction companies got together and said, okay, what is the impact of how we build houses, how we build roads? Transportation companies, they could have more of an impact than the AU might have in terms of their educational agenda. So the more that we can begin to focus on those partners that have all this impact on children and on their caregivers and on the quality of how these environments for children are, I think the further we'll go along, because those will be natural partners when it's time to be thinking of cities, when it's time to be thinking about urban spaces. So my takeaway is that look for who is not at the table, but should be at the table. The thing about the tech sector that I think is amazing is the tech sector has been thinking differently. They've been problem solving on a different level. You know, we're just catching up to the way that they've been thinking about things 10 years ago. You know, so those should be our natural partners as we're thinking through, and not just about what's the latest app we're going to put in terms of our children, but in terms of what is the thinking process? Who needs to be at the table? What are the processes of thinking for us to be redesigning cities? So I think that there's just, we have to look at a strengths-based perspective, strengths in looking at our children, strength-based investments. James Heckman has done already. He won a Nobel Peace Prize to talk about the best investment you can make for any economy is investing the first 0 to 5 years. So, you know, we need to now just be smart. Does the financial sector know this? Does the banking sectors know this? You know, so if we give the information for the partners who are missing, what then can we create? So that's it.
I love that. Who's not at the table? And I think I've done advocacy in a whole range of issues, and it's always an uphill battle because either it's an issue that's culturally not, you know, kosher or anti-government or whatever, but this, you know, you made a really important point in our region. Who's arguing about kids, right? Like it's you know, there as something that is not debatable and not controversial, number one. And then you have already natural, I mean, it's not universal, but natural advocates, right? The parents, starting with the parents. And so perhaps too much we focus on the policymakers and the planners and so on, and not enough on you know, it's a rare luxury actually to have like a natural advocacy constituency that perhaps needs more awareness and to be organized, but they're there, which is an asset. So thinking perhaps more, I like this, who's not at the table and who could be natural partners that jump in.
Parents, forgive me, but parents suffered. You know, a lot of our work is going to be carried over because COVID happened. And parents were aware of the failure of the school systems, the absence of green spaces. So, you know, in a terrible way, here's this terrific opportunity for transformational space. Parents were affected. They could not economically support their families because of the failure of these two aspects. So
absolutely. And it's the equivalent of the GoPro for the 3-year-olds was in every household. Right? Like you didn't even have to record anything. COVID kind of did. You want to know how bad it is? We're going to show you 6 months locked up in with your kids without any kind of support. It's really kind of, and just, I think a lot of, many people you talk to say, okay, fine, there's the economy and all of these things, but we're all very aware of the damage that this has done to children, both in resourced environments and not well-resourced environments. I think the repercussions, we're yet to see them. Last word, Amoy, take us home.
So I just want to pull what everybody has said together because it resonates so much with me. I think that the best kind of play that we can foster is play that is democratizing. Children don't know who is from what different kind of background, and when we can have environments in which there is equity and, you know, children have the opportunity to play together, I think it's really key. But at another level, you know, there are some very powerful synergies of, you know, us working together, you know, pooling our knowledge base in ways that will, I think, give each one of us, you know, even more power in our own, you know, local communities, you know, to affect and influence what's going on in terms of play. And I can see a year or two from now, you know, if we were to have a forum, that there would be 2-3 times, you know, as much representation from around the African continent, not just of those of us who have been, you know, doing this for a while, but I'm sure that there are all sorts of, you know, budding initiatives in places that we may not even know about now. And, this forum gives us the impetus to find them, and pull everybody together.
Thank you so much, ladies. We could go on and on. This was fantastic. I've learned a lot. Thank you for your time and for sharing. And I hope those who are watching get something out of it. And in 2 years, we'll be back here talking about the newly launched Africa Play Network that's thriving. I think we should all commit to that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.